welcome to the conversation.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Good, good. So I've been meaning to really kind of really have a conversation with you about like, relationships and marriage and all those things that kind of go along with that. And like I think the first thing that I kind of really wanted to kind of get into is like what is that model look like for a successful relationship or a successful marriage to you? Like what does that look like to you?
There's so many factors, but typically when I am working with couples, I always focus on communication and intimacy first.
Okay.
I think those are the two biggest parts is like, how is your communication? Because a lot of times when we are having issues, the struggle becomes how are we talking about the issue? So typically we can't even get to what the root of the problem is because, oh, well, you said that the wrong way or your body language said this. So we like to make sure that we have like the basics of like, what is healthy communication? How can you improve your communication? And how do you talk about issues without causing more damage because of the way that you're saying something? And then when it comes to intimacy, it's the connection. And this is why so many people come and say, well, I don't know if I'm still in love with them, or I just feel like we're not as connected as we used to be. And a lot of times people think of sex immediately, but it's not even about that. It's like, when are you making sure that you are being vulnerable, where y'all are having a good time? Like, how are you having an intimate connection with the person that you've chosen to be in a relationship? So those are the biggest two. And I always like to say authenticity, because I feel like everybody wants to be in a relationship where you can be your authentic self, right? Where you
Yeah.
don't have to like pretend, or you don't have to like give like so much of yourself, or I have to like not show up in this certain way because if I do, then you're not going to like it. Like, you want to be with somebody that accepts you for who you are.
Yeah. So that's basically just like, being patient with, I guess in the beginning, just getting to know someone, right?
Yes. And that's why I don't believe in dating. I don't believe in dating with your representative. I
Yeah.
get, it's a difference between dating with a representative and putting your best foot forward. Like, yes, if I
Yes.
go to date, I'm going to put on makeup. I'm going to look cute. And even though I wear makeup 90% of the time, I might still do it on the date.
Yeah.
But you're going to get my personality. You're going to get who I am. But
Yeah.
so many times we're like holding back and we're trying not to like show up because we're worried we're too much, or we're not they're not going to like who we are, but then eventually you're going to turn into that person. So what do you do then? So
Yeah.
yeah, definitely taking that time to truly get to know who that person is and being honest about, is this something that I want or I can have or be okay with for the rest of my life, or however long you choose to be in that relationship.
Yeah. So when it comes to like, some of the, I guess, common like mistakes or errors couples tend to do or see, what are some of those things that you tend to see that couples are making? Like, what are those common mistakes that people are making?
I think coming into any situation with, I think it's okay to have clear expectations, but I think you have to be flexible with those expectations. We often come into relationships and like, this is the way it's supposed to be. The man is supposed to be this. The woman, if you're in a heterosexual relationship, the woman is supposed to do this. Or my partner, I expect them to be this for me because this is what I need, not take into account their needs. And so we get so like stuck in like, this is what I think a relationship is supposed to be, and we're not even taking into account like who's influenced your expectations, like who decided the beliefs that you have about relationship. Where did those come from? Because oftentimes they're not our own. They're a mix of media, society, family,
Yeah.
friends. All of those things have influenced what we think a relationship is supposed to be. And so now we're meeting this other person who's had a whole different set of media, society, family, and
Yeah.
friends that have influenced them, and we can't figure out like, why aren't we like on the same page? Like, why don't you know what it means to be in a committed relationship? Well, for me, a committed relationship might look completely different than it will for
Yeah.
you. So you have
Mhm.
to have those conversations, and you have to accept that like, just because you have these expectations doesn't mean that that person is going to meet them exactly.
Yeah.
It's very important that you understand and work through your own beliefs, because then you can kind of say like, okay, well, that wasn't really on me. That was really my mom telling me all this stuff when I was growing up. But now that I'm an adult and I've had these experiences, I can kind of shift those beliefs to fit what I need and what works for this relationship.
Yeah. So I noticed that you said something. So having realistic expectations.
Yes. But
Yeah.
also just having flexible, I feel like
Yeah.
is better. Like, I might in my head say, I want my husband to wash my car and change the oil And then I meet someone who's like, well, no, I don't change the oil, but I have a really good mechanic that I pay. And it's like, well, no, you're not a man unless you know how to change the oil. And it's like, why? Like, when did that become such a thing for you? Is it because your dad was that way? Is it because your mom always complained about not having something? Like, what made that such a thing? And why can't you be flexible and like, as long as the oil gets changed, like we're good, but people get so caught up in it needs to look exactly like I want it to look. And then they get disappointed and you're not the person for them because you're not fitting in the standard that they created.
Yeah. So that also ties into like being like more understanding to a person because they're different also, right?
Exactly. We all have different thoughts, feelings. We come from different places. You can't expect someone to come in and fit exactly what you want them to be.
Yeah. So when it comes to like working with a person that has a different set of belief systems than the other person,
Mm-hmm.
I know that sometimes that is difficult. So how do you kind of direct people with that, right? Like if they have a different belief system than their partner, like what do you usually tell people?
A big part of it is we're going to get clear on what your beliefs are versus what your family's beliefs are or what you
Yeah.
think you're supposed to believe, right? So that's kind of taking the time to explore the beliefs. And I do a lot of work around because that's typically what shapes who we are, our behavior, all of that is
Yeah.
like these beliefs that we have. And so I want to do work around like where do these come from and why are you holding so strongly to them? And it's okay, like I'm not trying to like take all your beliefs and throw them out, but
Yeah.
sometimes we have these certain ideas and beliefs that once we start to break it down into like where do they come from, you realize they're really unfounded. Like there's not a lot of substance there. It's just,
Yeah.
well, this is what I was told, or this is what I thought, and that's it. And so really taking the time to break down and understand why you have those beliefs, allowing your partner to do the same thing, and then coming to a conclusion of like what works for us. Right. So like I had this one belief, you had a separate one. Maybe we need to kind of like pull back a little bit and see how do we make that work for us together. A lot of times when we are so stuck in our beliefs, we don't leave space for anybody else, right? There's no room for your beliefs or what you think it should be, because like if it doesn't look this way, then it's not right.
Yeah.
And I'm really big on there are a lot of different roads to the same destination. So
Yeah.
if your goal, like when I think about parenting, it'll be like you need to parent this way, and it's like, well, what are your goals for your kids? And they might say, well, I just want them to be a productive human being, and I want them to be responsible and da da da. Okay, so do you think this is the only way that you can get there, or could your partner's way get you there, or could y'all find a third and fourth way to get you there? So truly like accepting that people have, like I said before, different experiences, and that means that's going to impact their beliefs. And
Yeah.
then how do we start to really listen to each other and accept that it's different, but then find something that works for both of us?
So even with belief systems though, because there were some good points that you made, like even with belief systems, sometimes are there belief systems that you can't really bend on per se, right? Like are there belief systems where it's just a deal breaker, right?
Definitely. Yeah. And it just depends on who you are.
Yeah.
If I have a belief, like if I'm a Christian, right, and I'm
Yeah.
faith is like the center of my world,
Yeah.
and I feel like if I'm with someone who doesn't feel the same, that might be something that's like, you're not going to have me question my faith, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you're with a person that's maybe more spiritual, maybe they're not so focused on Christianity, then
Yeah.
it's like, not to say you can't make it work, because you can, but if it becomes like this whole like, well, maybe I need to question my own beliefs and why I think, like some people, it's just like, no, I don't feel comfortable with doing that. Like I feel strongly
Yeah.
and I feel comfortable in whatever that belief is. And that's perfectly fine, but I think sometimes we hold on to these beliefs, or even my favorite term is I am who I am, you should just accept it, right? And
Yeah.
it's like, okay, but I'm hoping that every day, let me not say that, I think that a lot of people want to grow, want to
Yeah.
change, want to be better. And
Yeah.
so who you were 10 years ago, 10 months ago, 10 days ago may be different than who you are now. So when we hold so tightly to these beliefs without like the growth and the knowledge and questioning and things like that, it's kind of like you want to stay stagnant, but it's because it's the place where we're most comfortable. But yeah, there are definitely some that it's like, if this is what you believe and you feel like that's not going to shift, that's fine. But at least take the time to explore it and not just going with it without even knowing why you believe it.
Yeah. So a lot of times I notice in relationships too, people lose themselves, right? Like people, they get into these relationships and these are like very serious, very committed
Mm-hmm.
relationships. And
Mm-hmm.
some individuals, they fall hard, right? They
Mm-hmm.
fall hard for the person that they're with and they lose that whole individuality of who they
Right.
are.
Mm-hmm.
So with that, like how important do you stress individuality in a relationship, like remaining an individual?
That is to me one of the most important parts or most important factors in a relationship is making sure that you keep who you are and stay as an individual. Because that's the beauty, especially if you're able to understand yourself, you're aware of who you are and why you're the way you are, and you allow that same grace to someone else. I think that's the most beautiful part of a relationship is two people that are so solid in who they are coming
Yeah.
together and just enjoying each other, where I'm
Mhm.
not necessarily having to like mold into you or you're not molding into me. Like literally,
Yeah.
we have different opinions and I can accept your opinion and we can have these. I'm a debater, so I like to debate. Everybody knows it's not like that. But you know, we can have these debates and it's not
Yeah.
taken personally because
Yeah.
I just as strongly as I know who I am, I know you know who you are. And so we can have these conversations and kind of explore the world from these two different perspectives as opposed to believing it has to be one perspective. So I think it's what keeps relationships fun and interesting is when there are two different people in a relationship and it's not just like we like to do this, we're this, we do that. You know, we become when individuals become we, it becomes a little boring.
Yeah, yeah, and most times that's kind of how it gets, especially if you're in like a relationship. I guess that's like 5 years or plus.
Yeah.
Sometimes you get into this routine where it's you and them, and it's like it's constant circle to a certain extent.
Right. And
And
that's how
it's
you
how
end up.
fun. Yeah,
Yeah. And that's how it ends up where it's like, well, I already know you, so we don't need to talk. Like, I know what you think. I know who you are. I know. And it's like, but hopefully, again, same as I said earlier, hopefully everybody's changing and growing and evolving. And so it
yeah,
should be an ongoing exploration and an ongoing, like, getting to know who you are and not so like, well, we don't need to like do this because I already know who you are, how you are, and what you think.
yeah.
Um,
So less assuming, right?
less assuming, more exploring, more curiosity.
So when it comes to like even with that, maintaining like a healthy emotional connection, right? Like
Mhm.
with that person, like best practices for that, like making sure that quality time is there. Like what are some of those best practices that you kind of tell people when it comes to like that emotional connection, right? Like
Right.
maintaining that with their partner.
I think what you just said, quality time, but like just are you continuing to have positive interactions? I say have
Yeah.
fun, but it doesn't even have to be fun. Like, can we like, do we enjoy each other's company? You know, again, when you've been in a long relationship, we
Yeah.
start to get into these routines and it starts to be neutral and bad. That's it. You're not having as
Yeah.
many good times. So you definitely have to make sure that you're investing time and like, are we continuing to increase our positive interactions? I believe, and I might be off, but it takes 5 positive interactions to offset 1 negative interaction. And so how often are you investing in those positive interactions? It could be you made a dumb joke this morning and cracked me up, right? Or
Yeah.
it could be, I sent you a text, hey, I was just thinking about you today. I hope you're having a good day, right? So that when we do have that like negative little off moment, or if we do have a fight, it doesn't feel like we've been neutral and then, down. It can feel like,
Mhm.
no, we have some ups and then neutral and up and then, oh, okay. But then, we have some bounce back, I guess is the way I want to say it. And so really making sure that you're having fun. I think another best practice is when we are talking about intimate relationship and keeping an emotional connection is how are you doing with those intimate details or those vulnerable moments? Are you keeping that between y'all? Are you throwing it back in the person's face?
Yeah.
Like that type of stuff is another way that if you want to keep that emotional connection, making sure that you're creating these safe spaces where you
Mhm.
can enjoy each other, where you can have these deeper conversations,
Yeah.
without the fear of how it could be used later.
Yeah. That gives that person that reassurance that they can kind of let their guard down
Exactly. Exactly.
and make sure that that person knows that they're operating in a safe space so that they can open up and communicate to the person without fear of retribution of anything like that,
Right.
right?
Right. Exactly. That's exactly right.
So even with that, and I know I tell people this all the time when it comes to, because I've heard of this, like love language, right? Like when you talk
Mm-hmm.
about love languages,
Mm-hmm.
I tell people sometimes that it's kind of hard to kind of understand a person's love language when you can't have a conversation with the person, right? Like when you can't
Mm-hmm.
communicate.
Mm-hmm.
So that whole idea of communication versus love language, like what do you think about that, right? Like,
It's true. It's very true that A lot of times what happens is, and this is just going into any conversation, we go into conversations with our lens on, right? My life
Yeah.
experiences,
Yeah.
even my experiences within this relationship, that is how I'm moving into this conversation. And so
Yeah.
if we're talking about love languages, and I know that I'm a person that's a physical touch person, and you could tell me all day, like, well, I'm a words of affirmation. It's like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
but it's easier for me to do it in the way that I receive it, right? That typically makes it a lot easier. So if I'm like, yeah, but I'm sure you really like physical touch, or my favorite is gifts. People try to like talk bad about gifts. I don't think gifts it's a love language. It's just, I like to know that you thought about me while you were out and about. But a lot of times when like somebody's in trouble, the first thing they do is like, oh, let me go buy some flowers. Let me buy
Yeah.
this thing. And it's like, that's nice, but if that's not that person's love language, then it's not going to be as effective. It's not going to touch them the way that if you had sat with them and had a full conversation with them, or gave them your undivided attention, or did something around the house that made their life a little bit easier. So you want to, be able to, I think communication is all about how do you give and receive messages, right? Like, what are my thoughts, what are my feelings, and how am I sharing that with you? And
Mm-hmm.
love language is the same thing. It's just with love. How do I give and receive love? And
Mm-hmm.
so if I'm listening to you and you're telling me like, this is what I need, even if we've both, let's say both of our love languages is quality time, one person's quality time could look completely different than another person, right? I might be
Yeah.
okay with both of us being in a room and we're both working, or you're playing your video game and I'm reading my book, and to me that's quality time. Where another
Yeah.
person is like, no, we need to be intentionally talking to each other and engaging and all of that. That's quality time. So you
Mm-hmm.
have to be able to have those conversations and really listen to what the person is saying, as far as like, what do they need, and being clear on what you need as well. And also being honest when, if you ask for something and then you realize like that's not really it,
Yeah.
you have to be honest with that. And that sucks in the beginning as you're learning each other, but
Yeah.
hopefully, you can get to a space where it does feel like, okay, we kind of have this flow and we understand each other.
Yeah. So do you think it's best for people to kind of create opportunities for communication?
Definitely. I'm really big on one of the first things I do with couples that come to therapy with me, after we go over communication and we talk about like what's hindering their communication and how do we improve it. The first homework I give them is every day spend 5 minutes just kind of practicing the skills that we've done in therapy.
Mm-hmm.
But along with that, it gives you an opportunity like every day to connect, every day to kind of have, even if it's just a brief conversation. Because what happens typically is if you put aside 5 minutes just to have a little simple, how was your day? What's going on? Any struggles? Da, da, da. It'll end
Mm-hmm.
up lasting a little bit longer. Because
Yeah.
when you actually talk to your partner, you'd be like, oh yeah, this is why I like you. This is why we got married. So people forget
Yeah.
those things so quickly as relationships go on. So really like being
Yeah.
intentional about how do we spend time? How do we communicate? Are we just doing just a regular check-in of like, what's going on? How are you? What's your day been like? And things like that. Are you doing that on a regular basis? Because that truly can completely shift the relationship. Even a small thing can shift a relationship.
Yeah, and it can. So something that I noticed that dramatically shifts relationships is that whole thing between work-life balance, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like
Mm-hmm.
today and how it is right now, people are like so into like career and making sure we're
Yeah.
here and there that sometimes the relationship goes to the wayside.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And you just kind of have to go back to it. So when you talk to people about that whole work-life balance, how do you direct individuals kind of then?
It Work-life balance is an extremely important thing to continuously work on,
Yeah,
especially if you could recognize that it's never going to be perfect.
yeah,
I think I don't I don't believe that there's like a true like every day I have everything perfectly aligned and I'm
yeah,
able to show up. That's just not how
yeah,
life works. Some days the relationship falls by the wayside. Some days you're parenting if you're a parent. Some days your job. Depending on what you have going on. But the goal is just to continuously strive to do better in all these
yeah.
areas, right? So if
Mhm.
I'm a bomb mother and bomb wife, my job might be suffering, right? But when I'm
Yeah,
on it at work and I'm with my friends and we're hanging out, then my partner might feel like he's suffering, right? And so the goal
yeah,
is just how are you continuing to put effort into all these areas, and that's when you really start to see like this ebb and flow of how things go. But when
yeah,
you say I have to completely focus on work, I can't give anything else my attention, because if I do, then who's going to pay the bills? Or if I don't give that my attention, then what's going to happen if I lose my job or whatever the case may be? It's like, well, the reality is it's unlikely, and I know it's hard for people to hear this, but it's unlikely that if you take an evening off to go on a date with your partner, then you're
mhm,
going to get fired if you've been putting your effort into that job,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
And so again, it's how are you continuously just finding ways to put effort into every area, not believing that you need to be perfect all the time.
Yeah. And I think that that's the thing that individuals and couples need to kind of consider whenever they want to improve that aspect of their relationship, is just making that choice to actually make sure that they are doing those things for the other person, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because
Yeah.
sometimes that's like the hardest thing to do, is that choice. And I'm
Yeah.
not sure why that is, but it just
Yeah.
sometimes it gets lost in the mix, right?
Yeah. I definitely think that we are often, again, thinking from our perspective, what do I want? What do I desire? What is my view of life? But along with that, it's a lot easier to make decisions that benefit us. And and especially if you don't know exactly what that person wants, or especially if you're like, well, I'm doing this for us too, right?
Yeah.
Because that's
Mhm.
what a lot of people like, I'm working for us too, so that should count. And it's like, yeah, that does count. And I'm sure your partners are very grateful for that. But also, how do you, again, I'm really big on intention. So what are you intentionally do specifically to cultivate and to improve our relationship though? Like, you are doing this, the work stuff for yourself, for the household, for your fulfillment, but then how are you also working on the relationship and getting fulfillment in that, and making sure your partner has fulfillment in that as well?
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, that's a good point. So effort has to be made on both sides of that coin to
Definitely,
make sure
definitely.
that that relationship stays solid.
Yeah, yeah.
So when we were talking about that, like we talked about the whole emotional aspect of it, but what about the physical side, right? Like,
Mhm.
is that like one of those things? So from a physical standpoint, is like lack of that physical aspect, is that like a deal breaker, right? Like, is that like the complete deal breaker for most relationships and marriage?
Funny enough, no. I think that's the biggest fear that people have when they think
Yeah,
about marriage, is like, we're
yeah,
not going to have sex. Sex is going to
yeah,
stop. But
yeah,
I think people realize that although it's important, right? And
yeah,
plenty of people seek help because of, the sexual relationship, it's
yeah,
not a deal breaker. Um, Typically, when we talk about sex, that's such a broad thing, like, because you
it
could be
is.
having sex all the time and have the worst relationship in the world, right?
Yeah,
Or you can be like striving to have a good relationship, but sex may be like the place where y'all are kind of lacking and it's not really working out.
yeah,
I think I look at intimacy, like I said earlier, I look at intimacy more than I do the sexual part. I think sex is extremely important. I encourage people to have sex as much as they will enjoy and that their partner would enjoy and all of that. But I
yeah,
also feel like a lot of times what happens is we only focus on, and I don't know how explicit I can get, but we only focus on like the penetrative act of sex, and
yeah,
not on uh just even if we're talking about physical affection, we're not focusing on like, how are we being playful with each other throughout the day, right?
yeah,
How are we when we're interested in having sex, like, are we doing foreplay? How
yeah,
are we making sure that the other person is relaxed or that we're relaxed?
yeah,
It's so many aspects that go into it that we just kind of skip over, and all we think about is the fact that we're not having sex, and that's all that matters. And so it's extremely important to identify, like, what other areas are you lacking.
yeah,
Most of the time when people are if the sexual relationship isn't there, I could pinpoint 2 or 3 other areas that are also lacking, right? We're probably not spending a lot of time together. We're probably
yeah,
not going on dates. We're probably not having these laughing conversations. We're probably, like, those things are probably not happening as well. But because sometimes sex is the first thing that we notice, we don't
yeah,
recognize how it is impacting other areas. So I don't think I mean, make your deal breakers what you want them to be, but
yeah,
I don't think it's a deal breaker, especially when you start to identify like how intertwined all these areas of the relationship are.
yeah. So basically, kind of everything just ties in together. So you have to have a communication based relationship in order to have a great physical based relationship, right?
Right. You don't have to, but it makes it a lot easier, because it's a lot of people out here that can have great sex, but then they are still frustrated and angry and can't communicate and all that kind of stuff. But
Yeah,
are you, and then, and even that, there's a difference between having great sex and having a great intimate relationship, if that
yeah,
makes sense. Like, you can have
yeah,
great physical sex where your needs are met when the physical release and all of that. But
yeah.
do you have an intimate relationship where you trust someone, where you feel like you can explore even more of your sexuality because you trust that person? Like, do you have that part of it?
Yeah, and that's kind of what I ended up finding, is like one cannot exist without the other.
Yeah, yeah, it's
And
really hard.
basically, what I find is from I guess a woman's standpoint, and women are a little bit more emotional when it comes to that whole aspect of it. So if they're not emotionally connected to an individual, they're not going to want to do it as frequently, and they're not going to want to do it as much with that person because it's a disconnect. Like it's a disconnect between that. And with men are a little different, right? Like men can actually just power through it to a certain extent.
Yeah, it depends. Yeah.
But women, most women can't do that. Like that's not how that goes, especially when you're in a committed relationship.
Right. So yes, if we're generalizing, that's typically how it goes. But definitely, I want to speak about there are people on both sides that feel the opposite, right? Because I work with a lot of men that are like, if I don't feel emotionally connected or intellectually connected to you, then it's going to be hard for me to want to have sex with you. But along with that, I think it's important to. I lost my train of thought. But yeah, I think it is true that those things are connected. And what I was going to say is a lot of times what happens in a relationship is one person doesn't even recognize that there are issues until the sex kind of stops. Yeah. Right. Like they don't always identify that there are other areas that are lacking, or even if the person may tell them all the time, like, hey, I need this. Hey, I want this. Can you do this? Or I want more of an emotional connection. I want more intimacy. I want all of that. And they're like, yeah. But then when the sex stops, it's like, wait, what's happening? Why? And it's like, well, you didn't think the emotional connection was important. You were invested in that. So then when this person says, well, I don't feel comfortable investing in a sexual relationship, then all of a sudden, then it's like, oh, this is. So we have to start looking, to your point, we have to look at both of those as just as important, because the if I'm not getting my emotional needs met, and that's not important to you unless you, sometimes it doesn't feel like it's important until you stop getting your physical needs met.
Yeah, and see, we saying the same thing right there. We saying the exact same thing.
Yeah.
So when it comes to, like, I guess the grand scheme of things, which is overall change in relationships, like one person may view it as, in their relationship, that okay, a person can change. The other person may view it as, I don't know about change. So is it possible, like in your view, do you think it's possible for people to change within a relationship, to get better and be better?
Yes. So I'm a marriage and family therapist. And so the way I look at the world is in systems. So I look at how everybody's connected. I look at how what I do impacts the other person and what they do impacts me, So I 100%, one, change is going to happen. Now, I can't predict if it's good or bad, but change will happen if one person starts to work on themselves, on their relationship and things like that. I've definitely worked with individuals that have come because they knew that they had some stuff that was blocking them. They knew that they were struggling in certain areas, or they were contributing in some type of way. And that's not to say that 100% of the issue was on them, because again, I look at systems. So you cannot tell me that if there's a couple that's together and it's like, well, they're the problem and they're always doing this and they're always doing that. And it's like, well, how are you participating in this system? How are you participating in this dynamic? Because I can't fight by myself, right? Or I can't, whatever the case may be. And even if I am fighting by myself, and if this person is so like, for lack of better words, crazy, I don't, whatever. If that's the case, what about you is making you stay in this relationship with a crazy person? So that means you also have some contributions to this dynamic, and so that's why I look at it as, like I said, a system. And so, if one person is coming and they're working on their stuff and they're going to change their approach to how they interact with their partner, if they are working on how do I be my best self in a relationship, because so many people in relationships struggle because they feel like I can't even be who I know I am, right? I can't be who I am to my core, because it feels like, it just feels like whoever shows up in this relationship is not me. Like whatever this person brings out of me, it just does not feel like me. And so it's really about, like, how do you get more in touch with who you are? How do you understand what's healthy and what's not healthy? Do you have blocks that are stopping you from that intimate connection? All of that can definitely be worked on as an individual and can impact the relationship. But along with that, you have to be mindful that when you start to change and when you start to bring those dynamics to the relationship, your partner may not be for it, because they've gotten so comfortable in the dynamic that y'all had that it may be some pushback that comes from those changes that will happen. But that doesn't mean it won't end up successful.
Yeah, you're right. You're definitely right about that. So would you say that, when you talk about like family therapy and family, like couples counseling to that extent, would you say that that's for everybody, right? Like couples counseling, would you say that that would be for everybody to try to do?
Yes. I
Okay.
think, and it's so funny because even as a relationship therapist, as a marriage counselor, like I know for a fact that I want to do couples and marriage and premarital and all those things, because it's only so much that you can see, whereas a person on the outside can kind of, like I said, especially if they're, I mean, therapists probably are all good, but I know for a fact that marriage and family therapists focus on the dynamic of the individuals, of like how you interact with each other. We are trained to look at systems. We're trained to look at patterns and all of that. And so when you have a third person that can kind of look at the way y'all are interacting and say, I see what's happening. You are triggering this person because when you said that, they heard this. That's not what you said, but that's what they heard. And so when they heard that, they got defensive and they shut down. And when they shut down, you felt like you had to keep pulling out and pulling out, and, you know. And so when somebody on the outside can actually look at that, even it doesn't even have to be like we're having these huge issues. I love my couples that come and see me as more of a proactive thing. Like, we're not bad. You know, we have some stuff, of course we have fights and stuff, but we just want to make sure that we're like bringing our best self. Everybody can, because even to the point of, which is again why I like working with individuals as well, even to the point of just identifying like, what are your beliefs about relationships and sex, and where did they come from, and are they actually healthy? Because if I have a belief that all men cheat, you know, how is that then impacting your relationship? How is that then impacting when you interact with someone and you're dating someone, but in the back of your head, this belief is just sitting there? Right. And so I think it's extremely helpful just to get that knowledge and to challenge yourself, but then also to kind of understand more about your dynamics, so that as you're going through life with this person, you can even start to recognize like, oh, okay, I just got really defensive because I heard this and I don't know if that's what you meant. And you can start calling out your own patterns.
Yeah. No, you're right. You're definitely right. Like I think that therapy is very important, like especially counseling, especially when it's from a couple standpoint. Because a lot of times, as individuals, sometimes asking for help is always the hardest thing.
Yes, it's
And
extremely difficult.
especially when it comes to like the dynamic of your relationship, it's a very touchy situation, right? Like you don't want to just go out there and just ask when you think that you can fix it yourself.
Right. And that's what everybody, you know, we got this, we can do this, we can fix this. But you also, I mean, and I'm even a person, like, I'm a therapist, but I'm not, therapy is the end all. I just believe healing in any way that you can get it is important. So whether, if you're a person that takes courses, if you're a person that reads books, if you're a person that goes to a coach, if you're whatever, a pastor, whatever you need to do to, but we have to understand that while we have everything we need inside of us to heal and to be better and all of that, you can't always see that when you're just in yourself. You have to sometimes have outside resources that show you how do you get in touch with that part of you.
Yeah, and I think you're right. You're definitely right about that. So, last question. So, what motivates you every day to get up and be the best version of yourself?
Because I wouldn't be able to survive any other way. It's taken me, and that's just the reality. It's taken me a long time. And, you know, I don't know who your audience is exactly, but if you think of a therapist, you probably would not necessarily think of me, which I'm perfectly fine with. But it's taken me a long time to kind of get into my authentic self and bring my authentic self in whatever I do. And in doing that, I have found the cure to burnout.
Okay.
Is for
Okay.
me
Okay.
is when I don't feel like I have to show up in a certain way, when
Yeah.
I feel like I can be authentic and obviously professional, but also just authentic in who I am. And I can talk to my clients the way that I speak to my friends, and while being, again, professional. It helps me continue to want to do what I'm doing.
Yeah.
If I felt like I had to be a certain way to help people, I don't know how long I could keep that up. And
Yep.
so I also know that me being the best version of myself helps anybody else that's around me, and helps the people that I want to help. If I'm struggling, if I'm like stressed, if I have all this stuff where I don't feel like I have myself together, and granted, I'm human, I don't have my stuff together all the time. A lot of
Yeah.
the times I don't, but you know, I'm always working to be better, and I've accepted that this is an ongoing process. And so as long as I can be that for me, then I know I can show up for other people just as much. And I think, you know, we didn't talk about self-care, but that goes into like why it's so important to make sure that you're taking care of yourself. Because if you are pouring into yourself, if you're doing what you need, if you're being your best version, then it does make it easier for you to help other people. And it does make it not feel so so draining when someone asks for something, because it's like, yeah, I got it to give because I made sure I gave it to myself.
Yeah,
So I
you're
can
right.
definitely give it to you if you need it.
You're right. And that is a perfect ending to this conversation. So I want to thank you, Ebony, for having this conversation with me.
Thank you for having me. This is fun.
Yeah, so thank you for taking your time. And definitely, you have a great day. And I'll definitely see you next week.